exploration of vocalization of our desires. Maggie has been a Unitarian Universalist and a Wiccan since 1998 and a member of this congregation since 2014. Presently, she serves on the Board of Trustees. She's the former Dean of Students at the Cherry Hill Seminary and a past board member of the Coven of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, as well as a second degree witch and priestess in the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel. After a varied career in mechanical engineering, journalism, real estate, and adult education, she earned her master's degree in spiritual psychology and is now a hospice and hospital chaplain. Welcome, Maggie. Our beautiful music this morning is performed by Tara Webb Dewey on the piano with vocalist Willa Douglas. I also want to extend a very special thank you to our tech team who make all of this possible, especially this week to Treva, Eric, Avery, and both Carolyn's. We have just a few verbal announcements this morning. Please follow along in the chat for details on contact information. If you or someone that you know is in need, please reach out to our caring committee who can provide support. Today, for the youth, early elementary explorers go exploring at 1 o'clock. UU Minecraft Camp for rising K through 5 is at 2 o'clock. And again at 3 o'clock for a rising 6th through 12th graders. Some of our regular groups have gone on summer hiatus, but we're still hosting the 5 p.m. weekday Standing in Solidarity for Racial Justice video in front of the church. July's Friday and Saturday morning yoga with Esther and Wednesday meditation with Deborah. And this coming Saturday's Root Dance will be held at 6 p.m. in the Grove. Our Moving Ahead Task Force is planning to begin multi-platform services in late August, and we need some help with video. So no prior experience is necessary, just a willingness to learn, and volunteers of all ages are welcome. Finally, after service today, we will have our July Q&A with the board on widening the circle of concern. I'll provide access details after we pass the piece. A complete listing of all of our events is available at our website and our newsletter, so please check those out. Now, let's turn our attention to the present moment, engage our hearts, spirits, and minds for worship. Our chalice lighting words this morning come from our guest celebrant, Maggie Beaumont. We come together this morning from our many separate rooms, thanks to modern technology. We come together from the comfort and safety of our own places, from the awkwardness and the uncertainty of borrowed spaces, and from the miracle of public transportation. We come together from different time zones, different weathers. From all of those places, I ask you to bring your attention, your hope, your strength, and your understanding to the work that we will do for this hour. I light this chalice in honor of community, clear intention, and honest communication.
might have happened if Taylor had asked upfront for what they wanted?
Good morning, Unitarian Society of Germantown family. It's so good to be together on this fine morning. Hope everybody's okay after those storms last night. I'm really glad to highlight what Susan already mentioned, that we will be beginning in-person and multi-platform worship services on August 22nd. We're still working out the details. We're going to have a town hall meeting on Sunday, August 1st, to share more about the plans and the efforts that are being made. But going forward from there, the plan is flexible plan that it is. Plan is that folks will be invited under certain protocol to come in and enjoy worship in person or watch it on Zoom.
Put the video on
Virtually. So look forward, but I know so many of us miss being together in person. I certainly am deeply excited about being together to celebrate life with you all in the sanctuary again, starting August 22nd. I want to lift up another joy in the community. Two of our newer members, Eileen Devlin and Mike Moran, are new grandparents again to a healthy new grandchild, Francis. So we wish you much congratulations and blessings in your family, Mike and Eileen. And then I want to lift up the following folks who in our hearts, thoughts, and concerns within the congregation. Carla Campbell and Ron Ross were in an exciting visit with their daughter Katie and her wife Teresa, visiting with their children from South Africa when they all were diagnosed with COVID. And Ron especially struggled. Fortunately, they're all on the road to recovery now. Good reminder for all of us to continue to be careful. Edgar Spencer, our wonderful singer in the choir, has continued to struggle with multiple strokes and is receiving different tests and exploring different treatment plans. Lynn Kalish had a revision of hip replacement surgery and is recovering. And Celeste Lamb, our administrator's mother, Mary Ellen, has been in the hospital for over a week now. So our thoughts and prayers are with all of them. We lift up the people of the planet struggling with heat, fires, heavy rains, and floods. We pray for their safety and well-being, and we give thanks for all the compassion, all the efforts of compassion that are happening around those events and in our own lives and community every day, every hour, every moment.
Let us join now in a spirit of meditation, contemplation, prayer, and peace. When the silence ends, please join in singing Spirit of Life, each of us in our own space. In these moments of silence, may we find within ourselves the awareness to know, the courage to ask, the openness to accept. May each of us know ourselves loved beyond all reason as we experience our precious lives. Amen, and blessed be.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing
Maggie, you're muted.
Oh, dear.
Now you're good.
Okay, now I'm good. No, something's wrong. I have an echo. Am I unmuted in two places, maybe? Okay. So yes, I think we got it. Okay. So on January 16th, 2007, 14 years ago, Andrea Donderi, whose name I hope I'm not mangling, posted a reply on a place called Ask Metafilter. It went viral, and in 2010, Alex Eichler wrote about it in The Atlantic. I'm quoting just part of Andrea's response, but I think you'll get the idea. And by the way, Alex's article is well worth the read. In some families, she said, you grow up with the expectation that it's okay to ask for anything at all, but you got to realize you might get no for an answer. This is ask culture. In guess culture, you avoid putting a request into words unless you're pretty sure the answer will be yes. Guess culture depends on a tight net of shared expectations. A key skill is putting out delicate feelers. If you do this with enough subtlety, you won't even have to make the request directly. You'll get an offer. Even then, the offer might be genuine or pro forma. It takes yet more skill and delicacy to discern whether you should accept. She goes on to point out that some of the problems, let me start again. She goes on to point out some of the problems when these two approaches collide. Guess culture people receiving unwelcome requests from ask culture people can find them presumptuous and out of line. They may feel angry and manipulated as a result. Ask culture people often find guess culture behavior inconsistent, incomprehensible, and passive aggressive. And they may feel angry and manipulated as a result. Guess behavior really only works with a subset of people who share a lot of expectations and signals. The farther you get from your own family, friends, and subculture, the more you will need to ask. Let's look at an example. Here's an actual conversation from the previous century, which I really only remember because of the long discussion that came afterward. Grandma, aged 80-something. Thanks so much for opening the door for my guest. I don't want to keep you from your homework. Grandson, age 14 or so. No problem, I finished my homework during study hall. He settles back in his chair. The grown-ups start talking. Grandma, that model rocket you were building yesterday seems like it's coming along nicely. Is it time for the next step? Grandson, nah, the paint has to dry till tomorrow. Grown-ups continue talking, grandson listening respectfully. Grandma to her son, who has just come into the room. Hi, dear, can I speak to you a minute? And then whispering so that her son can barely hear her. I can't get your kid to leave us alone, but I want to have some private conversation with my guest. Son, in a normal voice, come on, kid, let's you and me leave these folks to their visit, okay? Son and grandson leave the room. Much later, after the visitor had gone, there was a huge argument. Grandma wanted son to berate and even punish grandson for rudeness. Grandson wanted to ask grandma why she didn't just say what she wanted. He actually thought it might be rude to leave the room. And besides, they were talking about something interesting. There's a lot to unpack here. Grandma was raised by Victorians. Kids, if you don't know what that means, you can look it up. All her life, grandma used a certain ladylike indirection to attempt to get people to do what she wanted. It worked pretty well with her sisters and with her nieces, who are less than 20 years younger than she was and who were raised in the same community. It worked sort of well enough with her children, who are 40 years younger and grew up in a different part of the country, but did, after all, have parents raised by grandma. But it hasn't worked with the grandchildren at all. She still did it right up to the day she died, and she still thought she was right, and we all should have learned to read between the lines. Her grandson, on the other hand, grew up in the 1990s. His mother, his school, and his friends all value directness. He has been taught that indirect hinting is a form of manipulation and, you guessed it, rudeness. He mostly doesn't understand it anyway. If grandma had asked at once, he would have left at once, probably with a very polite, nice to meet you, to the visitor. If instead of asking about his model project, she'd asked directly at that time, he would have left at once and probably wondered if he had missed another one of Grandma's hints. Clearly, Grandma is using guess culture, but grandson comes from ask culture. I suspect a lot of our communication relies on other people knowing already what we probably mean, but other people, especially our own children, probably don't. When I was a child, parents had a lot of expectations that weren't necessarily clear. I know when I was a parent, I had a lot of unclear expectations, so I suspect this hasn't changed much. We were supposed to be polite, whatever that is, especially to our elders, and even more especially to our parents' friends. We were supposed to act like ladies and gentlemen, whatever that meant. We were often told that children should be seen and not heard, and then one or other of us would be called into the living room to demonstrate some new competence. Play the Chopin prelude I just learned on the piano, for example. Though years later, I finally heard it played correctly. Or maybe we would be asked to recite some memorized Bible verse. That's both a performance and a way of practicing for Sunday school. Other times we could be chastised for showing off without ever understanding why it was necessary to show off on command and a bad thing every other time. Much, much later, I learned that parenting goes better and children's behavior is much more acceptable if we give them really clear instructions. A friend of mine begins every outing by describing in detail what she wants the kids to do. We're going to go into the store now. I want you each to remember to use only your inside voice and remember to wait until you have my attention before saying what you want to say. If I'm talking to another grown-up, I want you to wait quietly until I ask you to speak. I won't ignore you if you stand where I can see you. I'm only buying what's already on my list, so please don't for anything else, and please don't touch anything on the shelves unless I ask you to. Any questions? I so wish I had talked to my own kids like that. When we ask people to stop doing something without saying what we would like them to be doing instead, it can be pretty confusing. Many parents I know, including me, have been heard to say, stop bouncing that ball, or even stop making that racket. That is, the noise of the bouncing ball. But what does the child hear when we do that? Bouncing the ball. So now what's the child thinking? Of course, only two choices. Keep on bouncing the ball. Whether that's out of inertia or defiance makes not a whole lot of difference. Or struggle to think of some way to just stop and only then try to think of something else to do instead. How much more effective for the parent to say, please take that ball outside? Or if that's not practical, how about please put the ball away? You could open a book or get down one of the board games. Now the child's thoughts are on put the ball away, or at least I don't want to put the ball away. But almost at once, do I want to read or play a game? And let's not forget the damage we can do when we get angry before we say what we want. Not long ago, I found myself hearing about 5 minutes of sharply worded, loud volume harshness that boiled down to, why in the world did you think I wanted you to do that? I'm glad it wasn't directed at me, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to intervene. The speaker actually had no interest at all in hearing why the person they were yelling at had done what they did, but the speaker sure did want them to know that they had done the wrong thing. After the shouting subsided, someone else asked quietly, what do you want to happen next time? The shouter, having calmed somewhat, took a moment to think and then said, there must be a dozen more effective ways to deal with that. It took a couple of repetitions of the same question before the shouter was able to say, next time, please just put the broken parts in a bowl and tell me where the bowl is, and I'll fix it later. It would, of course, have been great to have that instruction before whatever it was got broken. But at least next time, and isn't there always a next time? Maybe the shouting can be avoided. It's only fair to say that sometimes when things go wrong for the first time ever, nobody knows what they might have asked for in advance. That's how Jean Kerr came to write a lovely book called Please Don't Eat the Daisies, which begins with an essay about raising children and all the things they do that their parents never anticipated. There's a lot more to asking for what you want, of course. If it were simple, everyone would do it. There's the question of altitude. If we're looking at the wrong level of a problem, we'll ask for the wrong thing. Telling a student they should think about getting an A in the class is too abstract if what you really mean is read chapter 2 and write out the answers to questions 1 to 5 and be done by 9 p.m. so you can get a good night's sleep. If the problem with the bouncing ball is the noise in the house, we'll make a different request than if the problem is the fragile vase that's being threatened. Why should the person pay attention to what I want anyway? With children, parents also assume that because I said so is enough. And a lot of the time it can almost be enough. But it helps if there's something in it for the child too. I don't mean bribery. I'm not advocating if you stop bouncing that noisy ball, I'll let you have some ice cream. But when we ask someone to stop doing something, it helps to have some idea what their perspective might be. And most people respond to a positive request better than a negative one. After all, most requests to stop are very close to criticism. Some of us can be very sensitive to criticism. So what do we do when we need someone to stop doing it the way they're doing it, or even to stop doing whatever it is altogether? First, I would encourage looking to see why they're doing it, or why they're doing it the way they're doing it. Is there something you can ask them to do instead? Is there some perverse incentive that makes them do exactly that thing you'd like them to stop doing? The example of perverse incentives I thought of first was the fact that Medicare pays doctors more for doing procedures on our bodies than it does for investing the same amount of time in prevention and patient education. But then I looked up perverse incentive on Wikipedia and discovered more than a dozen large-scale historical examples and several more that are still going on. Yikes, there's a whole different sermon in that. When we want to ask someone to stop something, we should be looking carefully at what made them start and what we want them to do instead. Back to the bouncing ball. Is the child bouncing the ball out of boredom? Or did they just get up from having to sit still for an hour of computer homeschool? Or maybe they're trying to develop the coordination and skill to join the basketball team. What we ask them to do instead might be very different depending on what they needed when they start bouncing that noisy ball. And that's just a simple example. Consider what happens in the workplace. Many managers feel that employees ought to want to do the work correctly, but we employees don't always realize what correctly means in the eyes of our bosses. What if the boss explained specifically what was wanted? Especially when giving corrective feedback, detail is useful. Ask for what you actually want. It matters too how the instruction is given. I think I already mentioned that people respond better to positives than negatives. And look at the great success of crowdsourcing. One of the few things social media is really, really good for. Things like Hive Mind, how do I do this thing on the computer? Always gets me 5 or 6 answers, of which 3 or 4 are absolutely perfect. Or how about GoFundMe or other fundraising efforts? And then there's Craigslist and FreeCycle. Not only can I put a discarded couch on FreeCycle and have somebody come over and take it away that week, I can also ask for a couch on FreeCycle and have somebody pop up and say, I've got one in my basement, would you like it? How lovely to ask for what we want. But back to positives versus negatives, how do we talk to ourselves and our loved ones? How many times have I said, don't forget? Okay, so now the emphasis is on forget, thanks a lot. Or how about, you never take out the garbage? Wouldn't it work better to say, please take out the garbage before bedtime? That's more like what's needed, isn't it? I want to talk especially about a piece of operative magic that really works, asking for what you want out loud, even when you think nobody's listening, or at least nobody's listening who might actually give you what you ask for. True story. And my apology in advance to those of you who have heard me tell it before. Some years ago, I found myself saying it would be nice if this rain would stop so we could walk into the house without getting drenched. So we drove on for a few more minutes, and when we got to the house and got out of the car, it was still raining, but only barely. We got a few drops on our shoulders, but we did not get drenched. Over time, I noticed that this sequence repeated. I would ask gently for the rain to stop just for a moment at some particular time and place, and it would. My friends began to wonder out loud if I had some power over the weather. Well, no. From my perspective, though, it looks like this planet and every being on or in it is a single organism in the same way that my body is a single organism, you know, made up of a whole lot of cells, each doing their own thing in some level of cooperation and occasional conflict. But what happens in my body if some part asks for my attention? I notice that I practically never scratch my ankle unless it itches. And if my ankle itches, I will almost always scratch it right away, unless for some reason I can't or shouldn't. Carrying a pan of hot water, say, or holding a squirming baby, or maybe if I have poison ivy. So if the weather and I are part of the same organism, what happens when I ask for the rain to stop? From my perspective, it looks as if it's convenient, the weather shifts just a little to give me what I've asked for, unless there's a good reason not to, or I've asked for too much. If my whole body is constantly itching, I probably can't scratch everywhere. And if it goes on for more than a moment, I probably shouldn't, skin being fragile after all. But if it's just an ankle or an earlobe just for a moment, no problem. In the same way, I can ask for and receive a break in the weather for a few minutes at a small location. But I'm not about to try to ask for the whole state of Pennsylvania to be sunny all day just so I can go on a picnic. So, okay, it's nice to be able to ask for what you want when no humans are listening, or at least nobody whose judgment you're concerned about. But what are some other good reasons to ask for what you want out loud? Well, it may not feel like asking, but I bet when you decide to visit someplace you've never been before, you look at a map or put the address in your GPS. Isn't that asking? If you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get there. Same thing with education, whether we're talking about college classes or a one afternoon workshop. If you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get there. If you don't know what you want, it's hard to get it. And I'm tempted to say, if you don't ask for what you want. But what about when you do know what you want? Do you ask? When we need cooperation or help from one or more other people, it's really hard for them to do what I need them to do if I keep it a secret. Sometimes that's even true when the person who might not be in on the secret is me. If I say out loud, I need to find my keys, that will usually produce the memory of exactly where I left them this time. Of course, they have a defined place they're supposed to land when I take them out of my pocket at the end of the day. But sometimes, inexplicably, they land somewhere else. Like the other night when my back was bothering me and I laid wallet and keys on the desk instead of going all the way to the table by the door. What did I come in here for is a question I probably ask out loud several times a day, having forgotten on the way to the kitchen whether I was hungry or it was time to feed the cat or I wanted to collect my phone from where it was charging. Some of us can have two-way conversations even when no one else is home. What was I looking for? You wanted to get something you brought up from the car. Do you remember what it was? Not exactly. Where do you think you put it? Probably on the kitchen counter. I won't try to explain while there are both I and you pronouns in that conversation. I'm not sure I know myself, but I will say that those conversations nearly always work, and they work far better out loud than when I try to go through the same logic silently. Probably this is an effect of age and cognition, but I understand from my kids that it works for them too. I'd love to explain why such conversations are necessary, but all I have are clues. In a world where I get 100 new emails every day, it can be hard to focus my attention. In an apartment where I'm in year 7 of the 1-year downsizing project, it can be hard to remember whether I still have that book or did I already give it away. The fact that clutter, whether mental or physical, gets in the way of being effective is the subject of some future sermon, but asking for what I want out loud is often the quickest way to cut through it, short of actually decluttering, of course. Asking for what I want works with more things than just lost and found. There are places where we know we need to ask for what we want. In restaurants, for example, we know we usually need to choose something that's on the menu. Even if we're asking for something different, we know we need to be specific. But there are also places where asking for what we want would be really useful, and a lot of us don't do it. In the doctor's office, for example, we may start off telling the doctor what's wrong, our symptoms, or a list of the diseases we already know we have. But most of us, after a certain age, have quite a number of things wrong, or at least not quite right. And the chances are good that the doctor won't know where to start if we don't say. One of my colleagues tells the story of covering for another doctor in the same clinic. The patient came in using a walker and with an aide holding his arm for balance. The chart was dauntingly thick, but the problem list included a serious heart condition, a cancer recently in remission, a slowly degenerative neurological disease, and a number of smaller issues. The doctor didn't know where to start. Instead of guessing, she just asked, "What can I do for you today?" She expected some sort of, cure this disease or make a diagnosis, but what she got was, "I just want to stop falling. Falling is terrible." The doctor reported it would have taken her a long time to find that out if she started by making any assumptions about his list of problems. What worked instead was to adjust the time of day he was taking his medications. Let me repeat that. She didn't do anything at all about changing the symptoms of his major illnesses. All she did was readjust the schedule of medications so that the two most likely to cause lightheadedness or balance trouble would come after he was out of bed and dressed and safely in the chair where he spent most of his day, but also early enough so that his aide was still with him until those side effects had worn off. How about in our closest relationships? Are there things we want that we think we shouldn't ask for? Decades ago now, I thought I wanted a bit more romance in my life, but understand that what I knew about romance then came mostly from the movies of the 1960s. So what I wanted was for my partner to give me flowers for my birthday, say, or when I landed a promotion at work. But I thought my partner should just know to do that. I didn't want to ask. We were in marriage counseling at the time, so eventually I spoke about this out loud. I found myself saying that if I asked for something and then my partner did as requested, it wouldn't feel like a spontaneous loving gesture. It would feel like compliance, not thoughtfulness. I would always wonder if they did it because they felt they had to rather than because they wanted to. I would imagine that they resented my request. The counselor quite rightly and fairly gently let me know that that was hogwash. Mind reading is not, in fact, one of the talents most people have. And anyway, why was I afraid of receiving something I wanted because I asked for it out loud? Took a long time for me to realize I had learned in childhood that asking for something was inherently, always and everywhere, rude. Remember the grandma at the start of this sermon? That's the mother who raised me. Is it any wonder it took me decades to learn to ask for what I want? So if you're afraid to ask, I suggest you consider how well genteel indirection has served you and whether a clearly worded request might work better. A few weeks ago, some of us were wrestling with this very topic, which in some families can be pretty challenging. At some point, wanting to lighten the mood, we started writing limericks about it. They were pretty bad, but shamelessly, I'll share a couple of them with you anyway. Your ranting is most ineffective except as stylistic invective. The changes you seek can't be made by the meek when they don't understand your perspective. And you don't always get what you wish for when tactfully failing to ask. You want me to guess, I'm doing my best, but miserably failing this task. May we all get better at asking for what we want. May we each be open to receiving what we ask for. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When
Thank you, Maggie. That was a lot of wisdom. Our beloved community is a source of clarity and guidance and love to our vast collective of members and friends. Please be as generous as you can as we now collect offering for the ongoing work of our community. To give donations of any amount, you can text to 215-608-2660. For example, 20 space pledge applies $20 to your annual USG pledge, or 20 space sun sends $20 to the general Sunday plate. You can also give online at usguu.org/give or send a check to the office. These instructions will remain in the chat.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference where you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, no request is too extreme. When you wish upon a star, as dreamers do. Fate is kind. She brings to those who love the sweet fulfillment of their secret longing. Like a bolt out of the blue, fate steps in and sees you through. Wish upon the star, your dream comes true.
When you're making wishes, be sure to ask out loud for what you're wishing for, and then be open to receiving it, perhaps just as you imagined, or perhaps in a different form. May this be a gentle day. Stay cool, stay safe, and ask for what you want. Go in peace.
From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give. Together we share, and from this we live.
With the chalice extinguished, our worship service has come to an end. You're all invited to remain here in the main room for the Q&A session with the board on widening the circle of concern. To remain, simply don't accept the invitation to join a breakout room. Or you can accept the invitation to the breakout room and enjoy some time of fellowship. Please pass the peace to one another, ask what you want, Blessings to you in the coming week.